parents already might have self-judgments and judgments of their kids, and then on top of that, they get this diagnosis or this label from this system that amplifies that and says, your child is broken and you need to fix them. And I just asked the question, what do you love about your child? What do you enjoy about them? What do you appreciate about them? And oftentimes, honestly, for parents, especially after they've had the diagnosis, many parents will break down in tears because they've not been given permission to just love their kids.
So Andrew, you were talking with me earlier before we came on about the importance of not only accepting the child, but leaving the child in no doubt that they're accepted and valued for who they are by the parent. Can you say a little bit more about that and how a parent might make that visible to their child?
Yeah. I think it's a particularly challenging area and topic for so many of our parents and families, because I think in many ways, my belief or my perspective is that in most cases, we haven't grown up. Very few of us, or I don't know if any of us, have grown up in societies, cultures, families that completely accept us for who we are. I certainly know in the U.S., which is where I've grown up, we have a society that measures our worth based on how we perform or what we do externally in the world. We don't have a society that I think puts out the message that we all have deep inherent worth and goodness, and we don't live in a society that encourages parents and families to love their kids unconditionally. We have a society that is deeply focused on conditional acceptance. And I say that because when we talk about acceptance and being able to, and helping parents accept their kids more, sometimes parents can get the message that it's their fault, right? It's their fault that they're not accepting their kids as much as they would like. But the reality is that most of us, when we were growing up, didn't always get the most accepting messages from the people in our lives who were closest to us and who loved us the most. Not because they were bad parents or bad people, but because they had grown up in societies and systems and families that were perpetuating this kind of, you're not good enough, you have to do better, you have to perform. So this is very deeply rooted, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, because parents are already so hard on themselves. It's important to at least begin with that framing of parents are doing the best they can based on what they've learned and what's been passed on to them.
And the fact that parents are themselves subject to that principle, and they're subjecting themselves to that principle. And you said it's American, but I think it's probably worldwide. It's just that the Americans are less discreet about it. And you think of what's the biggest American insult? To be a loser. And if somebody loses things, what does it say about them? It doesn't say that there's some, they're still a worthy human being just because they've lost something. It doesn't take anything away from them. But I think not even all of your presidents are entirely comfortable with that perception. So it's everywhere, and it's elsewhere in the world as well. And so that parents are subject to that as well. Parents are also getting the message, you're not good enough unless you have success with your child. They're passing it on to their children. You're not good enough unless you're conforming to this social conception of success, which I'm taking on. So how do you transcend that?
Yeah. That's I'm pausing and taking a deep breath because it's a very it's not an easy, oh, just do this differently and everything will fall into place.
I don't think
Um,
there's a just in the answer. There can't be for this.
so um, I'm going to give again my perspective on what I've learned over the years, and it may be different than conventional, what's out there in child development textbooks about accepting children or helping them develop. Um, what I have learned is that my ability to be with a child in a way that conveys deep acceptance and deep love has a lot to do with um, my ability to convey that to myself. And what I mean by that is that I have had to do a lot of work on my own um, upbringing and on my own um, essentially the conversations that I have with myself in my own head every day that historically were very critical, were very punishing, right? I can be very hard on myself. I am shocked every day, really, by how much I hear from parents and professionals about how ruthless we all are with ourselves. Um, we learn this. There are many reasons for this, but it's very important for parents to begin to consider that it's not just about how they are with their children and whether or not they can accept their children. It's about what they tell themselves every day. It's very difficult if I'm in my own head saying, you look terrible today. That was a really stupid thing you said last night. You just really messed that up when you sent that email this morning. Like, if that's where I am in my head, and this is what happens for a lot of us, right? We're sort of we're beating ourselves up a lot in our heads. It can be very difficult to go from that mode to then all of a sudden I'm going to be completely unconditionally loving and accepting to the person in front of me,
Yeah.
which could be my spouse, which could be my family member, which could be my coworker, which also, of course, could be my child. So the reason why I say that, Guy, is because I think we've not done justice to this topic in the field. We've just sort of said to parents, okay, no, just go do it. Go be more accepting, go be more loving to your kids without understanding what sometimes is operating underneath.
Yeah.
So I start there, and then of course there's lots of things you can do
Yeah.
with your child, but I really wanted to start with that, really helping parents understand that most of us did not learn how to be this way with ourselves, and so therefore um, it's harder to extend that out to the people that were.
That's so interesting, and it's like it's a huge step, isn't it? But I guess that's why people say you can't be unconditionally loving, unconditionally accepting of someone else if you're not of yourself first. And so, it might sound self-indulgent, and it might sound like we're focusing on ourselves when we've got a bigger job to do for our children, but actually we can't do that job for our children unless we do it for us. And we did an episode of this, didn't we? Just on this topic some time ago. We need to accept ourselves first. Where do we go from here, Andrew? What's the next thing you want to talk about? Do you want to talk more about how we do that, or do you want to go on to,
Yeah.
having done that, how do we then transfer it to the children?
Yeah, I think it's so important, Guy, what you said, and it can feel overwhelming, right? I mean, that's really the bottom line with it, is when we start to realize just how hard on ourselves we can be in our own minds. It can seem like a massive leap to then all of a sudden, okay, so then how do I convey that? How do I convey this sort of, acceptance towards my child? And I think, again, it's important to acknowledge the challenge. At the same time, we do have every day incredible opportunities to be with our children in ways that are more loving and accepting. And a lot of that comes down, excuse me, Guy, I'm sorry that I have a frog in my throat. Um, a lot of this comes down to the way that we are with our children um, can be very, um, the way that I think about it is, if I can look at my child and be able to notice what is unique and wonderful and special about them, right? Um, in some ways, that can really rev up this engine of love and acceptance. And I think, this is something I do a lot with parents, especially after they have just gotten, their child has just gotten an autism diagnosis. Parents already might have everything we've already talked about with their own self judgments and judgments of their kids, and then on top of that, they get this diagnosis or this label from this system that completely, you know, cranks that up or intensifies that, amplifies that, and says your child is broken, and you need to fix them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like this double whammy of like, there's already it's already difficult, and then parents are getting this message that, oh no,
Yeah.
how can I possibly accept my child because they're broken?
Yes.
And so it sets in motion this horrible, I think, snowball effect. I don't know if you have that term in the UK, but it just keeps spiraling. And so a big part of where I start with parents is I just try to help parents kind of slow down and begin to acknowledge and consider. And I just ask the question, what do you love about your child? What do you enjoy about them? What do you appreciate about them? And oftentimes, honestly, for parents, especially after they've had the diagnosis, many parents will break down in tears because they've not been given permission to just love their kids. And what a from my perspective, what a crime that is, because we have this whole system that's trying to help,
Yeah.
but we're actually doing, I believe, the opposite of what we should be doing, which is, let's actually focus first on what is uniquely wonderful about your child, period.
That's such an important point. And like you say, that, the autism diagnosis, if you're already coming from a point of view of my child has to be like this in order to be acceptable and successful in life, and then the autism diagnosis comes along, then the parent's going to understand that autism diagnosis as a message to them: your child doesn't have the capability to be acceptable. Therefore, you're going to fail as a parent. And you've got all of that going on in their head. And that blocks them from having their true feelings. It's so sad what you said, but it's probably true. That parents just, their natural love for their child, which will be there in them because they're parents and it's biologically a part of being a parent, is sort of overridden. They've allowed it to be overridden by the expectations and judgments of society. So I guess you're saying stage one is understand that, see what's going on, understand that this is what's happening, understand that it's a judgment that might come very quickly and automatically because it's been instilled so strongly, but it's not instinctive, it's not inherent to you. Try and find what's inherent to you. first question to bring up. And then what do you do with that? What's the next step? How do you bring that to the child, to give the child that sense of being accepted and loved as they are?
Yes. What I'm so, in many ways, so painfully aware of, Guy, is how, again, going back to, like, I think the hardest thing from my perspective is to try to support parents in the ways that we're describing, to begin to see their children's strengths and what's wonderfully unique about their children, and to fall more deeply in love with their children, right? To support parents to do that in the context of a system that is pushing parents to do the opposite is really difficult. And I think it's important not to shy away from that, and to name it, because if we don't name it, parents, again, it's another layer of parents blaming themselves. I have been in this system in the US now for over 30 years. And it can be very painful for me to look back on ways that I, as a professional, have perpetuated this with the best of intentions. For example, I have sat in on countless family meetings, right? Either in the context of a school system or in the context of an early intervention program, where myself and a group of well-meaning professionals are sitting around a table with parents, starting a meeting with, let's spend a few minutes talking about what do we really enjoy about, or what's good about the particular child that we're there to meet about. And we'll all have this wonderful, warm few moments of, he's so funny and he has this particular sense of humor, or the way he plays with this toy and the sound he makes, right? Like, we'll maybe spend a few minutes, and then, right, we've done that for maybe 5 minutes, and then for the next hour or longer, we spend time spotlighting all of the things that the child is not doing, and all the ways that they're not achieving developmental milestones, and all the ways that the child is missing skills or lacking abilities. And no wonder parents leave those meetings being destroyed in many cases, because what have we left them with other than these incredibly finely tuned glasses or lenses on, these are the ways that your child is deficient and broken and impaired? And how can parents possibly feel like, great, now I'm going to go home and focus on what I love about my child? Like, we have done that to parents, again, with the best of intentions, because we are operating within these systems that are measuring human functioning and development in terms of performance and in terms of a very narrow band. But I say that, Guy, to, again, frame it in terms of course, parents are going to have a hard time accepting their kids because we have taught them not to. And when I say we, I mean the system and professionals.
It's very sad to hear about that meeting. It's almost like the first 5 minutes are very nice, but they were almost a token, and it sort of reveals that, however nice the first 5 minutes were, it wasn't seen as part of the process of the meeting. It was seen as something to counterbalance what was seen as the real purpose of the meeting, was to focus on what's wrong with the child and what needs to be improved in that child. And as you say, I mean, don't use that to be really hard on yourself as well, because you're part of this whole process as well. And I don't think there's a human being alive who gets to their 40s or 50s or 60s without having done some catastrophic stuff when they were younger, which is their only possible way to learn to, to get to where they are now and to be able to do the good based on that new learning. But having been through that, what can parents do to overcome it, to see through it, and to give their children that message that they are loved and accepted as they are?
Yeah. And very simply, Guy, it's just like um, spend more time every day doing what we do in the first 5 minutes of those meetings.
Yeah, yeah. That's
That's it.
yeah.
And I say the same thing to professionals, that it is your professional responsibility to spend a lot more time with parents and children focusing on their strengths
So
and
that's
what's
brilliant.
wonderful.
Right. So let's
Yeah,
focus on this because
yeah.
this is so important. So some people might watch this and they might think, is that it? I just have, is he just telling me to have some nice thoughts about my child and that's going to solve all the problems? Is he crazy? So, I mean, but can you explain a bit how it works? How can it actually be important that how we think, you know, even if it's a mechanical exercise at first because we're not used to it, if we spend some time and increasing amounts of time every day thinking about what we like about our child, what we appreciate, genuinely appreciate, not as a token activity,
Yeah.
but looking in our hearts and finding what do I genuinely appreciate about my child. How could that, you know, almost self-indulgent activity turn into something that's useful for the child?
That's such a powerful question, Guy, because it does. It can seem very self-indulgent, and people can think this crazy love guy, acceptance guy, Andrew is, really, what's the
What
expression?
do you
Office
expect from someone in
rocker. And
California anyway?
exactly. Yeah, of course he lives in California, right? Um, so what's so fascinating from my perspective at least is like I feel like again there are way more brilliant accomplished like people than me who specialize in many of these areas like of mental health, for example, um, and brain development. But what I will say is this, that one of the things we are learning about mental health and about chronic mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, um, addiction, is that when people are able to develop and cultivate more what we would call mindful self-compassion, right? There's a wonderful, brilliant researcher named Kristen Neff, who's kind of, really on the cutting edge of a lot of this work, who actually is herself raising, actually, I now think her child is now an adult, but who had an autistic child who, anyway. So I bring up Kristen Neff because she's done some very powerful research in this area of how we can address very deep challenges in terms of people's mental health, relationship struggles, addiction, by learning how to every day engage in particular kinds of practices. And by practice, I mean something like just either becoming more mindful and aware of what we're thinking in our heads about our children or about ourselves, and really being able to try giving ourselves some different messages or talking to ourselves a bit differently. That is what we now know has the deepest, longest lasting impact on positive mental health outcomes. Like the research is very clear. So, this idea of putting this sort of acceptance into practice is actually what we know protects all of us from some of the very, very difficult and sometimes awful um, problems or challenges in terms of mental health that we see in society, right? Whether it's depression or suicide or right, like. So the reason why I bring that up, guys, because this is not unique to being a parent of an autistic child. This is stuff that we know from science is pivotal to our well-being, our long-term mental health and well-being. And it's been historically written off as just silly, nonsense, ridiculous stuff. But we now know that it is very, very powerful and essential for us to have healthier families, relationships, and societies.
Yeah. And there's a lot of research in all different branches of science from all different perspectives, actually, which come to the same conclusion, that where we put our attention, where we focus our thought, is going to affect how we feel, what our condition is, and what we take out into the world. So if we're always thinking negative thoughts, if we're going around judging people, if we're going around noticing all the faults in other people, we're going to become somebody who's not very nice to be around. We're going to be attracting people around us who are also very critical and very judgmental, and that's going to become our bubble. Whereas if we focus on what you're saying, what we like about other people, what we appreciate about other people, what we appreciate about ourselves, even if you want to be really radical, that's going to change our mindset in a totally different way and give us the opposite sort of life. And essentially, it's a choice. I can't change how my life is now at this moment because I'm already here. But by choosing where I put my focus now, I can create my future. My future might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might be next year, it might be 20 years away. But I'm, with everything that I do now, I'm creating my future. And so the more I start thinking about what I appreciate about my child, the more the child's going to benefit from that. Now, of course, because I'm going to be changing my condition straight away. But those benefits are going to accumulate over time as I become somebody as a result of that thinking.
Absolutely. And just to carry that an additional step, like you had recently a really wonderful interview with Paul Mikolev, who's a brilliant autism and neurodiversity advocate and teacher, trainer, presenter. And one of the things that he said, especially, that really stood out to me at the end of the interview, was he talked about the importance of trauma-informed care. And this is essentially, people may not be familiar with what that means, but in many ways, aspects of it are what we're describing together in this conversation. That if we're going to be helpful to people, to everyone, right? Whether it's someone who is having relationship problems or an addiction, or has been through incredible trauma in their family or out in the world, the essence of it is learning how to be with people in ways that are more accepting, more as well as being with ourselves in ways that are more accepting, more supportive. And that's what we're learning now in whether it's psychotherapy or education, whatever arena, is emerging as the most effective foundation of care. And the challenge is none of us really know how to do it very well because it's so new, and because we've inherited these older ways of thinking and being from our families and from a society that didn't understand these things. So I think we have a long way to go, but it starts with these principles and these ideas.
And this is very different, isn't it, from what parents might be expecting to hear from us. They might be expecting, well, if you do this and you say this, and when this happens, you do that, and a set of techniques. But actually, you gave your answer to this question earlier, and I just want to repeat it because it was so simple that it could easily be missed, which is simply cut through the negative judgments that are coming at us all the time and the encouragements to think negatively, and regularly think about, spend a lot of your time thinking about what you love and appreciate about your child. And that in itself, in a way that hopefully we've at least started to explore a little bit, is enough to transform our relationship with our child, the energy that the child receives from us, and how the child is going to relate to us.
Absolutely, Guy. That's it. And I would just maybe add one additional piece to that, which can be harder for all of us, is to also think about some of the things that we like and appreciate and accept and even enjoy about ourselves. And whether that's something that I recognize that I'm able to do as a parent, something that I just did well, or something that a way that I am as a parent with my kids that I notice and can appreciate, those two things are very interconnected. So start where you are. If it's just too hard to think about something that you like or enjoy about yourself, think about your kids. And it's okay to start where you are, but the point is to begin to develop those really set of kind of muscles of being
Yeah.
able to see something that we appreciate about ourselves and about our children more, um, so that we can carry that forward into the world.